Arthur, could you tell me what you see as preventing a wider acceptance of your theory in the academic and scientific communities?
Well, of course, I set up the theory to reconcile science and the aspects of consciousness that are of interest now. I mean, things like ESP and so on. But as I find, I've antagonized both camps. The scientists, because this is an invasion of science, and the consciousness movement because it requires that they know something about science. If you want to go into a little more detail there, in the case with science, there is this fragmentation in science, a whole lot of different specialties, so that even if you were just integrating science, you'd have trouble because the different disciplines, they go on the rule that you leave me alone and I'll leave you alone. You find it especially in academia. I tried to have a course in integration at Princeton, and it was accepted by Goheen, but it was the practical aspects were pointed out by Dean Hamilton, who said you can't cross departmental lines. You have to be in one department or another.
You can't have an interdisciplinary department.
Right. Well, then, so far as the consciousness movement, ESP kind of thing, there are all kinds of reasons, but it principally boils down to people don't want to get down to the basis of things. I find the parapsychologists are the worst offenders. They're trying to make like science, and it ends up as a sort of cargo cult. They're going through the sort of ritual dancing of science and expecting to get results without facing up to what consciousness is. They don't even recognize the old-fashioned aspects of perception as already containing factors that are not sensory. And this requires you to look a little more into psychology rather than just take these hardware experiments. Maybe it's a love of electronics and so on. They want to put things on, read it. Nothing could be sweeter than to read it on a meter. I invented it as a theme song way back.
I think a lot of it, of course, comes from the demand from the scientific community for quantification and for this kind of repeatable verification.
Well, that, of course, calls for basic reform in science. It's not just a question of crossing departments. What is required is a change in the whole mindset of science. Objectivity is the cry, but you're not dealing with the objective here. You're dealing with what I call projective, but if you like, subject. You're dealing with, take telepathy, for instance. It's always defined as a form of communication between people. But it's not. Telepathy means feeling at a distance. And there's no such word in science as feeling. So naturally they can't understand it. Now let's see. The really, if you really want to get into it, the difficulties are that science itself is at odds with itself. And starting out with this classical paradigm and still clinging to this objective policy, it's turning out that the very basis of physics itself is not objective. We went into that before. The nature of forces and the photons, which physicists themselves are calling them virtual. You can't observe them. Now this is an ironical twist when you think that science started out by confining itself to what's observable. Well, then it turns out that the most fundamental thing they themselves call virtual, i.e. non-observable. Good enough. If you, as the Zen thing says, you can't have space just going to the east. You can't, or the famous story of the student said, yes, professor, it's all objective, but what is it objective to? There has to be this other side that's not objective if you're going to have a complete story. Now this is a great embarrassment with science. They have to go back on their word. And my story in that connection was the family cook made a telephone call, and when my mother wanted to find out about this extra telephone call, she said she hadn't made it. Well, the investigation kept going on. Mother didn't want to pay the bill, and the telephone company insisted that the call had been made. And finally the hired man said to the cook, well, why don't you just say you made the call? She said, well, I said I didn't, and I don't want to go back on my word. Well, science doesn't want to go back on its word. It said that everything is objective, and it's an embarrassment to science to discover that it's wrong. And if a person has a sore toe, you step on it, they're not going to like you for it. Now, I mean this quite seriously, that this is just one example. But now I've been finding that this famous formula that explains everything, if you have all the derivatives, it's totally inapplicable. It's insane. And yet all the books have it. What are you going to do?